Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to take another look at our fundamentals demo in Java, and specifically, we are going to take a look at the concept of arrays. Now, arrays allow for us to hold a collection of values, all of the same data type. For instance, we can have a collection of strings, we can have a collection of integers, or a collection of doubles. We can't mix and match those data types, so we'll have to have homogeneous values. But basically what it does is allows for us to hold a collection of values all in one variable. We're going to take a look at some of the difficulties or just features, if you would, of an array in this video. And particularly, we're going to focus in on strings. And so the idea here is that we want to collect some information from the user. We don't necessarily know how much to begin with. And what we're going to do is we're going to store that information then in an array, and we will need to grow the array as necessary. And then when the user is done collecting the information, then we simply want to display all the information back to the user. And so much like earlier videos, we're going to set this up as a demo. In other words, we are not going to accept any input arguments, and we are not going to return any output arguments. So the first step that we want to do is we want to come down here somewhere below our main, and we want to go ahead and create another public static void function. And since we're going to be dealing with strings, we are going to call this function ArrayWithStringDemo. And the idea again is that it is not going to accept any input arguments and not going to return any output arguments. We'll go ahead and get our comment block started that you can then fill in later. And we'll make some quick notes here that we want to collect info from the user, storing it in an array that needs to grow as necessary. And then upon entering a specific word or specific string, we will simply display all the info back to the user. So the idea here is we have no idea up front how much information the user is going to enter. Instead, we're just going to collect it as we go along, store it in an array, and then display it back to the user. Again, implied in this is that we're going to be using the console or the command line. So let's get started by creating some local variables then for this function. And so to begin with, we're going to have a single string, and that is going to be the value that we're going to collect from the user. We're also going to have an array of values that are going to also be strings. And you'll notice here a couple of things. First is I'm using the square brackets to indicate that it will be an array of strings. We are also assigning the null value because, again, I don't necessarily know how big the array will be. I have to start off with a default value. And we will change that in just a second, or default value / size for the array. And then to track then the size of the array and how to grow the array, we'll need a couple of additional variables. One we're going to set as our max equal to 5. And you'll see in just a second how we're going to leverage that and why we're doing this as a variable as opposed to just simply hard coding it into the constructor. We also need to keep track of the current number of values in the array, not just the size of the array. And so we'll use a count variable that will set equal to 0. And again, both of these will grow as we collect information from the user. And then ultimately, we want to have a way of collecting the information from the user and figuring out when the user is finished using our application. In this case, we're going to use a Boolean that we are going to call done. We will initialize that value to false. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we want to collect this information from the command line. So we will use a java.util.scanner object. We'll simply call it scanner, and we will go ahead and initialize it to a new java.util.scanner. with the source being system.in. In other words, basically, we're going to prompt from the command line and we'll capture the data from the user when they're typing it in on the command line. All right, so let's think about our workflow here. Basically, what we want is a while loop that functions using our done variable. And the idea is that while done is equal to false, we want to collect info from the user. Collect info or strings from the user. And to facilitate that, we need to tell the user what we're doing. And in this case, we're just going to do a system.out.println with a nice friendly message to the user that says, please enter a string or simply type in exit. And again, we don't need the single quotes necessarily around it, but that gives the user some instructions on what to do. And then what we'll do is we will capture that value using our scanner. And specifically, we will use our next line method associated with the scanner that captures everything up to the end of string or the new line character in this particular case. And so now what we can do is we can check to see if the value that was collected from the user using our equals ignore case matches our special word, in other words, matches the word exit. And if that is in fact true, then what we want to do is we want to set our done equal to true. And so that'll kick us out of our while loop. And if it does not match our exit, then under the else, we want to add the value to our values array. Now, this comes with a little bit of a catch here. We need to think about the current size of the array. So if there is room in the array, add the value. And then if not, grow the array and then add the value. Now, you'll notice that initially when I declared my values array, I set it equal to null, and I said we would use the max variable to keep the maximum size of the array, and then we would keep the count variable as a way of tracking the actual number of used elements in the array. And so we've got a couple of different ways that we can go about doing this. Again, I've picked the value of max equal to 5 arbitrarily. You'll see why in just a second. But what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and initialize our values array equal to then a new string array dictated then by the size of that max variable. In other words, in this case, max equal to 5. So this now assigns a new array to the variable values. Now, inside of our else branch of our first if statement, we need to check to see how many values we have currently collected. And so the first thing that we want to do is we want to increment our count to keep track of how many values we've collected. Notice that we start off with count equal to 0, so we have to increment the count as soon as we've collected the information from the user and we've identified that it is not the word exit. And so now what we want to do is we want to check to see that our count is less than or equal to our max. And then if it is, we have room in the array. Else, we need to grow the array. And in order to grow the array, then we have to decide by how much we need to grow the array. And again, much like in C, Java then has a penalty associated with resizing the array. If you recall back in C programming language, you would declare the initial size of an array either statically or using malloc, and then you would grow it as necessary by making an entire copy of the array. This might have been hidden from you based on the function and the approach that you used. However, though, in Java, we need to do the exact same thing. And so what we'll do is we'll leverage again our values variable. And we've got two ways that we can go about doing this. And so take just a second here, I will pull up our two approaches. One is that we can use the in a method that we find in our system class, sort of a convenience method that will allow for us to copy an entire array. And we have to specify both the source and the destination array, as well as the starting position in both the source array as well as the destination array. And we'll have a second approach then that we can take, which is part of our arrays class, which we will use also in the future. And this is going to be our copy of static method. And so to continue with this then later on, I'm going to go ahead and leverage our arrays dot copy of static method. And I'll leave these links in the video and the description of the video here. But basically what we can do now is we can say arrays dot all right, one second here. Oh, I'm missing my equal sign. That's the reason why it's not allowing for me to do my autocomplete. There we go. Sorry about that. So we'll do our arrays.copy of. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to make a copy of our original values array, but we want to increase the size. And in this particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the size by one element. Now, you could argue that this is a very expensive process. In other words, you would probably want to grow the array by more than one. We could talk about some tricks that you could do to accomplish this. For instance, you could grow it in increments of 5 and then ultimately shrink it as necessary. But for this video, we're going to focus just on the process of growing the array. And again, this is going to be pretty expensive if we do this every single iteration. Ideally, you would need to know something about how much information you're planning on collecting from the user. And then what we'll do here is we will simply increase the max value. So in other words, if we've hit the else branch of this nested if else, basically we have said that we've ran out of room in our original array, and we simply want to increase the value of our original array, and then also keep track of how many elements are now in the array by increasing the max count. Now, we could have done this a couple of different ways. In other words, I could have simply just pushed this value earlier and then leveraged the max inside of here, but I wanted to do this sort of a little more transparent so you could see exactly what's going on here. But the idea here is that either way, we either had enough room in the array or we grew it and now have enough room in the array that we can now do something like values. And this is where we want to think now in terms of indexing of our arrays. Now, we've already talked a little bit about this because we've actually used the arrays in our arguments from our console when you were collecting information from the user via the command line from arguments when you first initialized your application. So you know that Java is 0-based. And so what we can do now is we can leverage our count variable, and we can simply say count -1 is going to be equal to whatever that value is that was collected from the user. And so now you can see that we either had enough room in the array, and we've assigned then the specific value to the location in the array, and we've leveraged our count variable. And you'll notice again that we increment the count upon successfully determining that exit was not entered. So in other words, we're doing no scrutiny, we're doing no validation on this data or anything like that. Now, we've handled the collection part, we've handled the storage part. Now, the idea here is that once the user has entered in exit, in other words, basically what that means is that they are now done. What we need to do is we need to do a couple things. We need to appropriately resize the array if necessary. And again, if we've grown it, we shouldn't have any problems. In other words, if our count is less than or equal to our max, then we should be fine. However, if our count is equal to our max, we shouldn't have any problems. However, if our count is less than our max, we actually need to shrink the array. And so what we'll do now is we'll check to see if the count is less than our max, in which case then we are actually going to shrink the array. Now, the good news is we don't have to learn another function, another process. We simply then have an if statement that checks to see if our count is less than our max. Then what that means is that we allocated too much space for our array, and we need to shrink it, else do nothing. Now, normally we'd probably also want to check to see if somehow our count ended up being greater than our max. But again, since we've written this logic and the way we've written this logic, we should not have that problem. And so if we've allocated too much space for our array, then what we can do is we can again leverage the same trick using the arrays.copy of, and we'll use our values and then whatever the actual value is for the count. In other words, how many items did we capture from the command line? Now, once we've done that, what we can do is we can now set up a for loop to loop through each of the values in the array and simply display it back to the user. So we'll use a for loop to display the values to the user. And we could probably leverage one of our current variables, but why don't we just go ahead and add one more here? And we'll make this one pretty traditional here. We'll just simply have our index. Again, we'll just initialize it to 0. And at this point, then what we can do is we can have our regular for loop, and we'll say for index equal to 0, index less than. Now we can technically leverage our count variable at this point. Or we can actually leverage the values.length property of the array. And then again, index plus. And now what we can do is we can have a nice fancy print statement. We'll do a system.out.println. And again, you can decide exactly how fancy you want to get here. How about if we include both the index, and what I'll do here is I will simply throw in the index variable and then equal to whatever the value is at that particular location in our array. And again, if we've got all of our concatenation operators correct, should have this. Maybe let's go ahead and throw one more space in there to make it look a little more symmetric. And we should be set to go. And so the idea is this will just simply print out then the values in the array, much like what we do when we print the arguments on the command line. All right, so at this point, let's go ahead and build this. Let's see if we've got any mistakes in our code. It looks good so far, which means that we should probably come up here to our main, and somewhere near the top here so that it's easy to find, what we'll do is we'll throw in another else if. And again, here we'll have just one switch here since we're not going to be collecting any additional information from the user via the command line until they start using it interactively. That means that we can simply check to see that the args square brackets 0 equals ignore case. And again, what we will do here is we'll leverage our function name, which we said was array with strings demo. And again, we can call this whatever we'd like to. The idea is that we just kind of make it easier for us to find it than later on. And if this is true, then we simply want to make a call to our EE333 dot fundamentals demo dot array with strings demo. And again, that should all be then sort of encapsulated or all handled inside of the function. All right, so let's go ahead and build this real quick. Let's see now this in action. We can come out here to our command window. You'll notice I'm already in my classes folder. You'll see there is my EE333 package folder. And at this point, then what we can do is type in EE333.fundamentals demo and our switch name again, which is going to be array with strings demo. And if we don't have any mistakes here, we'll hit enter, and we're being prompted by our function to please enter in a string. I'm just going to go ahead and put in first and hit enter, and you can see now I'm being prompted again. We're just basically in this while loop now. So how about second? And then I'm going to go ahead and type in exit because I want to see what happens here. You'll see now I'm getting index square brackets 0. Actually, we got a little typo in our display here. Let's go back and change this. You were probably wanting to say something to me here as I was recording. I meant to have values here. So a little minor change. It works correctly, but we just aren't displaying what I wanted to. All right, so let's build this one more time. Let's run this one more time. Again, first, second, and we'll go ahead and put in third, and then we will type in exit. You can see here that values square bracket 0 is equal to first, values square brackets 1 equal to second, and so on. You could put the extra double quotes in there if you wanted to, but I think at this point you're sort of seeing what's going on here. Now, we really didn't stress test this application very much here. So let's go through and let's do a couple of these. What if we type in exit right off the bat? You'll see nothing is displayed. Well, and the reason for nothing being displayed is because if you come down here, I went too far, my apologies here. You'll notice that we are stopping then when the values dot length is hit. In other words, if index is 0, 0 is less than values dot length. In other words, if I type in exit at the very beginning, then of course I have nothing to display. And so at this point, then the only thing left to do then is to check to see if we can grow our array. And we've proven that we can shrink it, but can we in fact grow it? So let's do first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and then now for the important one here. How about if I put in sixth? And it looks promising, but let's push a little farther. Seventh, and then finally, eighth. All right, and now I want to type in exit, and sure enough, you'll see here that I was able to grow the array to the appropriate size to handle all of my arguments. Now, the last thing to point out real quick is because we're doing no parsing of any sort here, I can actually put numbers in here. And then type in exit, and because they're being handled as strings, Java is not going to see them as numbers. They're literally going to be the characters associated with 1, 2, and 3, 4, and so on. So I'll actually handle that particular example in another video. So hopefully you found this useful. Just to touch base on this one more time. Basically, the idea here is I want to create a empty array that I have no idea how many elements are supposed to be in there. I create this arbitrary value max equal to 5. I initialize my values array to that arbitrary size. And at this point, then I simply collect information from the user. If I still have room in my array, I will simply insert the values. If I need to grow the array, again, with the penalty of only growing it by 1, I think you could see here that we could quickly change this to another value. And more importantly, since we shrink the array when we're actually finished with this, it really doesn't matter what size we grow it to, perhaps in increments of 5 or 10, depending on how much data is going to be collected. But then we continue this process until the user types in exit. And once they type in exit, then we simply flip our flag to true, which kicks us out of our while loop, and then ultimately displays our contents of our array. So hopefully this was clear. Hopefully you found this video useful. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And thank you for watching.